who is at a company that's ground up AI-based, building an AI-based, LLM-based experience? Okay, so about half the audience. Who's at a, let's call it incumbent or companies that existed before this wave and adding AI into their, okay, about a third of the crowd. Okay, got it. And who's at a completely non-tech enterprise, not a software vendor of any kind, just looking at LLMs? Okay, we got it. One technical crowd. Okay. Second question, who's gone beyond POC to production? Wow, about half of you. That's more than I would have expected. Okay. Who's primarily using OpenAI? Mistral? Nobody? Llama? About the same. Okay, got it. Who's using a mix of LLMs equally? Okay, about half of you. Interesting. Maybe final question. Who's spending more than, well, you don't have to, not exactly, but let's say more than $10,000 a month on LLMs? Wow, 3 or 4 or 5 of you. Interesting. Okay. Great. So maybe I'll just ask you guys, just a question to start off. What is production when it comes to LLM-based experiences versus POC? Where's the fine line between the two? How do you know you've gone from one to the next?
So at Databricks, one of the things that we measure is you schedule something and it's happening, and then it's continuously getting improved. We call it more like a offline batch jobs or jobs. We call it like production. One of the definition is that. And also it grounds in the history of Databricks, like data analytics, data platform, scale, batch. People will schedule and things are happening. And then second definition of production is when you know the definition of what is good, or like when you have a very good evaluation data set. So if you have a customer who has a very good evaluation data set, who can say like, hey, this metric is not meeting, what is the problem? We know that there is a clear definition of what is good. Beyond that is basically putting in usage. If we do not have a customer who cannot define what is good, then we say that like it's in experimentation, we are in the journey and we are working together to hit that point of defining the quality.
Got it. Lee? And maybe one thing to add is all of the panelists here are vendors of software that enable applications to be built and deployed. So the more you can talk about your customers, not obviously names, but maybe you can say the industry they're in and sort of the problems they face, the more specifics we can get, anecdotes, stories, I think the more it'll be helpful to everybody. But back to you, Lee.
Yeah, so to me, what's the difference between demo and production? It's if you can show your boss versus showing your customers, right? When you show your boss, it's all on rails, right? It's like a train. You just show them the things, and then it's like, oh, this is amazing, right? This is like the best thing ever. And then you show it to customers, and your customers are like, hey, you know, what would you say if I say poop? And then you're like, well, I don't have an answer for that. And then that's when the production happens. So when you have poop in your system, that's when production happens. And I know this because I actually, you know, before I joined Llamaindex, I built a little demo and I showed it to a friend of mine. It's an ed tech thing, right? Like, you know, like helping kids learn how to read. And the first thing he did, this is a friend of mine, right? First thing he did is he started putting in poop. He's like, what happens if I put in these bad words? Like, will you filter them out? And then I started seeing them in the logs. I'm like, Don, what are you doing here? Right? You're my friend, right? You're supposed to like help me, but I think he was trying to prove a point that maybe, you know, it wasn't safe enough for kids or something. I don't know. But poop, that's when you get production.
Interesting. Never heard that definition, but now I know. Right.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting product market fit discussion. We've got to go through our logs and figure out how many poops do we have in our logs. But I think for some of our customers, it's been that difference between sharing it internally or to a restricted set of people, and then going beyond that. We figured that if you're starting to make approximately 10,000 requests across a month, that's when you're starting to see some scale. And that's an initial wave that you have a diverse set of questions coming in, you're making enough number of calls, and you will start to see the real production challenges that start to come in. So that's sort of been our very soft metric, 10,000 requests a month, and you're doing it across a diverse set of your customer base. That's sort of a good metric to go to production.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Another question that we sort of thought would be interesting to talk about, and this is probably the most meaty part, I would imagine, of the conversation today. What are these production challenges when you go from POC to production? What have your customers faced? In the market, we've seen people talk about privacy, security, latency, drift, hallucinations, security, all sorts of things, performance. I could throw out maybe 20 other things that are challenges, but in practice, what are these challenges that you've seen? How are they related to the use cases that you're deploying with your customers? And then we can talk a little bit later about how to overcome those challenges. But what are these challenges?
Maybe I can get started with a couple of anecdotes that we went through in the last 1 week. So one of the things was this customer is in a tech space, and they want to fine-tune PEFT, parameter efficient fine-tune models. And their question was like, how many adapters can I have? And what would be the cost of serving X adapters? And then should I base it on top of Llama or Mixtral? And then how do I evaluate adapters? So it started off with what is the evaluation data set you could prepare? And then how do you, PEFT is interesting because the cost to fine-tune a model is relatively very cheap. And then what it means is it helps them to continuously retrain, and continuous retraining requires capturing the data and a good evaluation data set to certify it better than previous version. So it all comes back to, again, evaluation, which is enabled by PEFT, and then cost, like how much I could scale. And there is no way, like, just come fine-tune hundreds of models, we'll deploy. It's not a good answer, because we don't have a mathematical way of like showing, do you really need so many PEFT? So that was one of the production challenge. Like, should I have many adapters? Should I have less number of adapters? And how do I evaluate? And is there a way of pruning? Like, I build 100 adapters, and can you help me between many adapters? Can I merge it? More like pruning technique applied to fine-tuning. So that was one of the challenge we went through. Second one is typical. I think many people will not be surprised, is I use vector embedding, and your LLM is not giving me a good output, the RAG typical problem. And then we went into a rabbit hole of doing evaluation with various evaluation data set we had. And what we figured out is, for the given context, the response was of acceptable quality, but the context itself was not set well. And then this was driven by like how they were like chunking the documents, how they were ingesting into the vector database. And then the biggest problem there was like, how do I evaluate kind of like a RAG studio, we can call it, like between different techniques all through the production deployment. So those are the two things, but want to hear more, and then I could go on a few more anecdotes.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, I think one of the things that we've done, right, is we say, look, we have 5 lines of code, okay? You can build a RAG system, 5 lines of code, right? The RAG system you're building with 5 lines of code works, but it's not a production RAG system. I think a lot of people we talk to, both in ML and outside of ML, they really want what I would call God mode RAG. Okay, they want something where, like, you just give them the documents, and boom, like every single question is just answered perfectly, right? It's all chunked perfectly, it's all ingested perfectly, and every single document is just like, it's great. And right now that doesn't exist, right? And so that, I think, is one of the things that we do a lot of user education about. OpenAI last year during Dev Day, they said, hey, we're doing retrieval augmented generation. And there was a period there, maybe like 2 weeks or something, where we're like, hey, maybe OpenAI, with all of their really smart people, and they'll figure out God mode RAG. but then we tried it and it's not God mode either, right? So like nobody right now has figured it out so that like anything arbitrary, you just give it and okay, it understands. And I think that's really the challenge that people see in production is, okay, well, then what I do. So in Llamaindex, we have a whole bunch of different strategies, right? And we say, hey, you know, like you can try this strategy based on looking at your data. You can try that strategy based on looking at your data. But that is a much harder user education problem than just say, hey, you know, press a button and boom, you know, your thing works perfectly.
Right. I think I have just a follow-up to that, right? I think I keep seeing a lot of these posts coming out from Llamaindex that says, okay, here is a new technique for RAG. And I think I have these 30 new techniques for RAG. How do we pick which one's the right strategy for us? Because, and I think all of these are insane. I mean, it's so good to read, but then in the end, I'm just going to miss out on the next best thing that comes out because I'm on holiday tomorrow. So what do we do?
Well, you know, I think it's having a systematic way of trying it, right? So, you know, doing the evaluations, right? And having a systematic way of trying it and saying, really looking at your data. I think one of the things that might surprise people is like, even if you look at like really top ML researchers, like if you look at, you know, like the really good researchers, they actually spend a lot of their time looking at the data, the raw data, right? And then like, you know, like how that's transformed. And I think that is something that like we as a community just need to like be more aware of. Like it's not going to be the same set of techniques for every use case, but you can try certain things. And one of the things I'll show you is like, you know, OpenAI even gave you like a low roadmap of things you can try, right? But it's not guaranteed that it's going to work for your particular use case.
Makes sense. I think, yeah, just quickly on mine, right? I think we've spent actually a lot of time just worrying about production problems because in my previous company, we were doing this so we were building like a Jasper competitor. It's called Pepper. And we scaled that to actually almost 1 million users who were using this content marketing, content generation tool. And between Ayush and I, we built out the tool. It worked well. But then we had built almost 40 retool applications to manage the production release. And this was just insane. And you know, now we see it as an opportunity, but back then it was just frustrating. Like, why can't I just push my logs into Datadog and let it work? I mean, the minute I did that, my cost ballooned 10x, and I'm like, no, we can't do this. So you scale back. So the simplest of things just didn't work. And we were just constantly worried about why doesn't DevOps for traditional engineering just scale over to LLM engineering as well? It doesn't because probabilistic data, tokenization, so many things, but that's what we realized it doesn't work. But I think of those 40 applications, we realized there are like 3 key things. And this, I think we validated across hundreds of companies that we've spoken to, 3 key challenges in production. So one is just cost. How do I manage my cost? How do I track my cost? How do I improve the overall efficiency? Second is performance. Performance will include, is it fast? Is it reliable? So every metric of traditional engineering performance just applies here. It just applies differently because latency is never sub 100 ms, which is expected out of every other API. This is different. And the third is obviously accuracy. So RAG being almost 80% of all of the applications that are finding value in production, accuracy with RAG is just extremely hard to do. And I think we have people here who are doing that evaluation piece. But I think evaluating RAG and then improving RAG is, I think, definitely a big challenge in production. I think measurement is the first step towards just solving it. So just measuring, evaluating what's going wrong, and then looking at data. I think that's what you mentioned as well. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Maybe another way of coming at this is, what have been the biggest surprises as your customers have gone into production?
Yeah.
Is it mainly the cost that's sort of ballooned, whether it's on Datadog, whether it's on the LLM side itself, or is there something else? What are some of these surprises?
Yeah.
One surprise as an engineer, it was very surprising for us is like, in our customer base, the latencies were important, but not the throughput. Like if you see the serving side of productionization, everything is based on like who has the highest token per second. For example, that's a standard metric for evaluating like, hey, they're moving fast, their quality, like their quality of serving should be really good and all of it. But biggest surprise for us was that that was at the bottom of the request that we had from the productionized customer, because either they were on the batch side where 60 token per second versus 100 token per second did not had a big impact, because to quote one of the customer, they were like, hey, I need to process 10 million records in 90 minutes. And then it's up to you how, and this was like generating embeddings for their documents. And they did not care like how fast you ran. They cared about like how much does it cost to like overall document embedding creation. Unlike the typical things that we see as a demo, like fastest, like Grok, for example, they are all awesome. There are specific places for it, but in the enterprises, at least, that's one surprise. Speed is less interesting for them. Quality is more important. For example, we clearly saw when Mixtral MOE came in, it's by far, I would say, 10x more than Llama in last 3 weeks since we started releasing them and made it available than Llama 2. So quality, that is a data that shows that quality is a lot more important than performance. So that's one thing that I would quote. Second, we were expecting this, but some of the customers stopped in POC even when it was like really high quality usage. The only reason is that they didn't know what they didn't know, like guardrails. So guardrail was not built because they couldn't have that system in place, even though POC was extremely successful. This very large customer in e-commerce company, they were unable to go to prod because stakes were too high for not knowing what they don't know. And they are like, is there a scientific mechanism? Is there a way for us to kind of like guarantee that things would not go very, like you might all have seen the Chevrolet's Twitter, like sell it me for $1. And then that has come up so much. We were surprised because we thought people will start to deploy and play like 80-20 rule, like 20% you deploy and go, but that's not true in enterprise, at least in vast majority of use cases we have seen. If you don't have to, even if they don't know how to define, they're not ready to go to production. Even if POC is like extremely successful, we have seen with many customers getting stuck at that level, and then we are going back to guardrails now.
Interesting. Are there other surprises that you've seen, Rohit, from your side, Lee?
I think one interesting surprise is this pre-ChatGPT, post-ChatGPT era, where I felt pre-ChatGPT, users of LLM apps were just not okay with the latency of these LLM calls or the hallucinations. I mean, everybody was just like, yeah, it hallucinates, it's not good, because we were used to deterministic systems before this. I think ChatGPT has done this amazing job for all of us, where they've made hallucinations okay. And people just know that, yeah, GenAI hallucinates, that's how AI is. And now all of us can write in our own applications that, yeah, it does hallucinate a little bit. Here's a nice refresh button for you. So I think that constant, so it's made it obviously easier to deploy apps to production, but then you need to have these refresh buttons almost everywhere. And maybe there are contextual refreshes that happen automatically as well. And I think that's caused a lot of adoption for RAG applications as well, because you're not worried too much about it's going to give out the wrong data. It's going to not respond to poop appropriately, but it's going to figure it out. Yeah. So I think that's been an interesting piece.
So to your point about latency, actually, one thing I've seen that I never thought I would see prior to this is now you see some applications with fake streaming. So
yeah,
like they get yeah. So you know how OpenAI has streaming, right? You get tokens, and like you get tokens one at a time. Now you see some applications where the streaming is extremely smooth because they got all the data ahead of time, and then they just pretend to stream. You see this more and more, and that's to your point about user expectation, right? So like now it's like, oh, even if I have the data, I shouldn't show the user immediately. I should actually just like scroll it through. Yeah. I mean, and I think like the other thing that is a really big change for application developers is how fast everything is changing, right? Like basically, OpenAI just released some new models, and then immediately Reddit like just blows up with complaints. Hey, this thing doesn't, broke my system, blah, 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 blah. I think it's been a while in computing since we've seen this kind of like exponential progress. Where, yeah, you might be building something and you might have to look through your system in 6 months or 4 months. And so I think that's a really big shift for software developers.
Got it. Thank you. Maybe one other area, if there's been any surprises, is open source versus more proprietary foundation models. When you go to production with these two different types of models, have there been different types of surprises or different experiences, or is it no matter which one you choose, you'll have a similar experience?
To put a customer, I've never seen a customer who will be like, I want to do only this model. The constant common ask with every enterprise that has gone to production is, can you enable me with zero code chains to hit different endpoints? It will be different LLMs, different embedding models, different vector stores. So they want some kind of gateway in everything, because the way it can get improved is by choosing the right thing. And then people who are closer to production, customers who are closer, and we echo with that, is there might be different specialized stack for each of the use cases, even for a single production application. And then different model will have different capabilities. Either it could be like cost, or it could be with the quality. For example, a 1B fee model could be better to answer few things, or you need minimum of 7B or like 70B. And then these things are something that are deterministic and can be built as a knowledge source over a period of time. And a classifier can be built with gateway type application. At least that's the hypothesis, and we have seen that happening. So to make that world happen possible, they want gateway. They never want to build a full stack on only open source or only closed source or only one data stores from a single provider. And I think strategically that makes sense. And I think that's how it should be, unless you are like absolutely on like continuous improvement loop with a single model, single store. I don't think we are there yet. Mixtral is great at many tasks. A lot of our customers hit Mixtral. And also we offer the gateway equivalent, where embeddings created on OpenAI embedding model versus like BGE, and then the recent LLM-based embedding models. And then LLMs as well, like Mixtral has been growing extremely popular compared to Llama 2. At the same time, we also see the same endpoints hitting OpenAI and customers asking for it. So TLDR, gateway for every layer of the stack is necessary, because that's how the improvements will be made. And we could expect, and we are already seeing, at least with few customers, that you could specialize a classifier to choose a stack that works for one specific purpose. And two dimensions we are seeing is cost and quality. Cost is something for future. People are like, okay, we will have certain customer segments, certain type of internal teams for which quality cost is the metric, and quality we can never, is in the regulated market.
Understood. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's your point, like that is one of the core value propositions of Llamaindex. We connect to a bunch of different LLMs, connect to a bunch of different vector databases. I think on the LLM side, one thing that I am a little bit worried about, to your point about the open source versus proprietary models, is I don't know how long it's sustainable for us to have, like the open source models are fantastic. Lots of you see lots of different applications using it, but I don't know how long it's sustainable to have this many models. The model training is getting extremely expensive. You see that just from like how much money these companies are raising, from the VC side, to train these models. So it is one of those things where it's like, are we going to see some kind of consolidation in the set of models in the next few years? Because it's kind of like semiconductors, right? Like it's like every new model gets even more expensive to train than the previous model. So it'll be interesting to see.
I think with the OpenAI Developer Day, a couple of months ago, we were pretty shocked by the improvements they'd made. And for the first time, we started thinking that maybe closed source or proprietary models might just have a long-term advantage, maybe. And and the other way we thought about it was that if you look at category after category of software, in how many of those has open source actually won? There's actually not that many such categories. And when you look at the cost or the pricing that OpenAI has, open source is not free. You have to run it somewhere. It costs something at the end of the day, and it may not have the performance that a closed source model that keeps improving might have. So, so that's where it sort of started changing in our minds a little bit. Maybe there's room for both at the least, and the proprietary models may have a long-term advantage. We don't know yet. We are investors in Mistral and Sarvam in India, and then a bunch of companies in the US. Our view as a firm is that each geopolitical region will have its own foundation models from a security perspective. That's important. But anyway, any thoughts on the open source side, right?
I think, so open source, I think similar, I would echo those thoughts. Right now, there's just a lot of these, so there's a lot of choice for customers. I do see like these paths diverging a little bit. So you'll have large models that end up being more proprietary because it's obviously much more expensive to train, much more expensive to host, etc. So larger models end up being good and better at generic tasks. And you'll have the smaller models, these some proprietary, some open source, might end up becoming more functional models. So you have niche tasks. For each of the tasks, you might have, okay, this is the best way to do it. And in fact, I was talking to Sandeep the other day. It's almost like you have these libraries, and you have tons of libraries that are out there. Each of these smaller models could just be a library that you plug in for a specific task. So talking to somebody, and text to SQL is now a task. And there are specific models that do it really, really well. So for each of these models, can you have either open source vendors or even proprietary vendors who are providing these models, and application developers can just pick the best one according to the use case and just go with it. And I'm guessing there'll be some sort of reputation mapping on it. Right now, there is this LLMs chart, which tells us, the LO ratings of different models. But at some point in time, it'll just become how many people are using it, what's the accuracy levels, and there'll be these reputation numbers that start to come up for all of the different models. So I would say open source, closed source, definitely. There's also the small versus big, which is a different debate altogether.
Got it. I'll ask one last question, and then I'll open it up for questions from you, which is, given that you all are serving other companies that are building out these experiences, can you talk about a couple of things there? One is, which industries or types of use cases are going to production earliest? So who are the early adopters of production grade sort of experiences? What are you seeing there? And then for those companies in general, how are you seeing them differentiate? There's this whole debate that's been there, and we don't need to rehash it here on wrappers versus other things. We don't need to talk about that, but what is the differentiating element you're seeing across these different experiences built out using your software products by your customers? So first question, what are the use cases or industries? And the second is, what are the differentiators they are bringing out?
So a common theme that we have seen is something like internal, for example, document summarization is one of the largest production adoption we have seen, where customers are processing millions of documents and then kind of creating a summarization and using that as a notes for their customer agents and their internal teams, and then like further processing. Second, we have seen a largest is a theme of, can I create a vector embeddings for all of my data with the assumption that I would be creating a view on top of it and then enable semantic search and various use cases on top of it, like building Google search on top of their own indexes, and then enabling internal as well as external users to build apps on top of it is the second most common thing that we have seen. And then this is mostly around serving embedding models. Here, actually, there was an interesting point that I just wanted to, the developer experience is very critical in productionization. For example, we version libraries, we version all the software today. One of the interesting conversations with the customer was like, hey, if I change the embedding model from BGE with 512 context length to like latest BGE, which got released yesterday, how am I going to change all the applications that are built on top of it? Is there a way in your vector store for me to like version this? is there a way for me to have versioned models like quantized versus not quantized LLM? So we are seeing a convergence around like, how do I version each layer of this LLM production stack in like a typical software stack? But coming back, so embeddings, document summarization, text to speech, and then converting that into a knowledge store are the three main very large adoption that we have seen so far in production.
And then the differentiating, like how are they differentiating? People are building out these applications. I guess internally you don't need to differentiate, but anything consumer facing or customer facing, what are the...
So the differentiating factor these customers we are seeing is like time to market is something that they are trying to differentiate on, like moving fast and then like delighting their customers using LLMs in production, because there might be differences in how fast you go and how do you delight your customer. So we have been in customer calls where like, we need it tomorrow, we need it next week. Like we need to move fast because differentiation of the quality will be generalized because models is accessible to everyone and the techniques are all common. Time to market is one differentiation they are seeing. And second one differentiation is about how many people you are enabling. For example, semantic search on the data, like can a product manager do a data analyst job is one of the largest customer we have who is building text to SQL and then report generation. I would call it more like a text interface on top of Databricks data products. So velocity, I would term it, like time to market and velocity, increasing velocity of the key players, key stakeholders on their product. These are the two differentiation factors they are bringing in.
Got it.
Third, last thing, third differentiation they haven't created, but they want to create is basically like, can I fine tune on my domain data? Like inference table is one of the product we offer where like anything you request response, everything is stored. And they want us to build a solution where they can make use of it to differentiate because it's very proprietary. And no competition can be competing with them because except that layer, everything else is available to everyone. No differentiation has been built, but very strong intention to build differentiation on already the interactions that has happened and on all the products in productionization is a prerequisite for them. I need to know everything that came in and went out, and I want you to help me to differentiate on top of it, which will be my own IP.
Thank you.
So my perspective is, so I got into this January 23rd last year. I went to the Scale Hackathon, and it was only the second time in my career that I realized that everything I had been working on before was completely obsolete. I was working on chatbots at Apple for like the last 7-8 years. And when I went to the Scale Hackathon, I was like, you know, first time I'd ever touched any kind of LLM API. I'm sure there's people who have used LLMs for much longer than I have in this room. And it was like, yeah, like now, even though we had I had a solid team and we had, lots of customer data and like multifunctional and PMs and all that stuff. It looks like what we built was like a kid built it, right? It was completely, utterly obsolete, right? Like just like you can talk to our chatbot. So it's you actually, if you have an iPhone, you can talk to Apple. I don't know if you know that we had some issues with the launch, but you can actually talk to Apple. You can talk to our chatbot, and it feels like a kid built it, right? Like compared to what ChatGPT is able to do with just a little bit of prompting, it really is a total game changer. So in terms of what I think people are going to build first, I think is they're going to build chatbots. Okay, I think people are going to build different types of text interfaces that are basically a bit of a chatbot. But I think the more interesting use cases are actually non-chatbot applications. So last year, we actually, with your neighbors upstairs, we hosted a hackathon that was called Anything But Chatbots. So about working on other uses for this technology. Because it's not only changed chatbots, but it's also changed the entire way we think about NLP, right? Like it's not just passed the Turing test, but it's passed the Turing test in a way that the NLP professors thought was impossible. The NLP professors used to think that trying to have a competition to pass the Turing test was not only a bad idea, it was an actively harmful idea. Like there were people on the New York Times who were like, hey, this guy Lobner who put up like $5,000 a year or something. They're like, he's doing a disservice to our graduate students by having people try to pass the Turing test when actually they should be doing real NLP work, right? So I think it's quite revolutionary. And I think there's actually a lot of applications that people haven't even thought of yet.
From a Llamaindex perspective, are there specific industries that are adopting it the fastest, or specific, industry, let's keep it at that, media and entertainment, or, financial services, anything there that you're seeing pattern-wise?
There's so many industries.
It's just very horizontal.
They're trying like so many, we talked to so many companies that are coming out of the woodwork and they're trying different things, because what happened last year was basically every single CIO or VP said, hey, I tried ChatGPT, it's pretty cool. Can you build something with it?
Yeah.
And then they built a very nice demo that goes on Rails. But this year, they're going to try to put those in production.
Right. Right. Last word for you. Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly. So I think we mostly only talk to folks who are in production or are going to production. So we are, I think, a little bit either behind the curve or ahead, however you look at it. But I think the companies that have gone to production last year were primarily software and IT companies. So they've implemented features. So these are generally large software companies or even smaller ones who've added GenAI to a capability list. So a lot of the software IT companies in production seeing that value today. The other industries that we're seeing some traction in now end up being financial institutions, so banks, insurers. They're seeing an uptick in going to production with these LLM applications. And then I'm sure the other industries are just about to follow. So this year is going to be a lot of this POC to production phase, but right now it's been primarily software companies doing it.
Understood. Questions? And just say who it's directed to and what organization you're with. Go ahead.
Dave, General Troublemaker. This is directed to everybody. So hallucination is a bit of a misnomer because foundational models are meant to be non-deterministic.
Yeah.
How do we think about educating, the industry and, talking about the balance between this undocumented feature and governance in a world where we're moving more towards fine-tuning and RAG?
Yeah.
That's one of the topic that comes often. So your analogy is like when we develop, a software, let's assume I'm building a calculator for a kid. You're building a calculator for college students, and then mine is a decimal only, yours is floating point supported, right? So the way we do is like, I don't try to fit floating point calculation, and we cut off, like this is not allowed. So one of the things that enterprises are doing and then going in that direction, probably a temporary fix you could call is like filtering at prompt level, where what are all the things that are not allowed? It might be theoretically difficult when we talk about it, but when it comes to practice, it's fairly easy when you actually focus on a specific industry. For example, a customer support, a HR support system within the company, they wanted to, it's very easy based on the indexes you have created on the HR support documentation in that company of what a HR agent can talk about. And then it's fairly easy and almost accurate to filter out number of responses that you could even try to respond. And second, when the request has passed through and when the response comes back, starting from regex to a very large language models, there are different things, but the trend has been more like regex is not acceptable, even though it's fast. People are like, fast doesn't matter. I want to make sure it's accurate because the cost is too high. So the world where it's going, when you're pre-training a model, you're pre-training reward models, and you're actually rewarding a model to kind of like do and not do certain things. The idea that's being explored is like, can I have a fee type model, like 1 billion parameter or 2 billion parameter model that is fine-tuned on list of knowledge bases that it can say like, I can respond or I cannot respond, and then tie that as part of the LLM chain. So those are the two directions is happening. One, build a knowledge index and filter the prompt. Two, build a small LLM, use it as a guardrail reward model you could call.
Other questions? Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Sagar, and I work for applications, and I lead their community bears. And I had a quick question for Sandeep, for Stu, and then probably, Rohit. And so the goal is we face several challenges, especially with the evaluation data, right? What lessons you could share, which some of the customers have learned to getting the quality and the quantity of the evaluation data set up, really up? And have you seen any surprises which folks have really, I'm pretty sure I don't know if they're sharing it enough, but have they shared any surprises they have received due to the evaluation set in this, right? As the first part of the question. Second part is,
Maybe just go with one first
Sure.
and then the next one afterwards.
Yeah.
You want to go- Maybe one of the things that I could start off with, like data leak evaluation into training data set has been one of the most common issue. Sometimes unknowingly, accidentally. There was previous discussion, like so many models will be built and it's so costly and all of it. But one thing we need to understand is like, even though there are 100 models coming in open source, actually, when you go back and see, the data lineage is pretty static and there is a large commonality in the data set. And how the data is processed and then like few additions and few domain is happening, but a large, so the deal there is like data flows through the models faster than more ideas from one model to another model. And then that also ties back to the question that you are asking is one of the most common surprises people have seen is like, hey, how come this model be so perfect? And then we figured out that data contamination is a common challenge. And second one is evaluation data set. There are two ways to see. One is a standard open source data set, but what we are working on and what I think is important is how do we enable users to give few short examples and enable synthetic data generation for evaluation data set? It's a work in progress, but when we talk about LLMs, it's not too far away. And then using LLMs to generate evaluation has been a common practice throughout for SFT, like fine-tuning, post-training activities. And then using the same LLMs to create evaluation data set is also a general practice that's done to overcome. And then how do you beef up your evaluation? Because it's very easy and also very accurate to say, when you restrict yourself to enterprise, like, hey, I am an enterprise in this industry, and here are the examples of questions that can be allowed to be asked, and here are the responses. Give me more examples of asking the same things and same answers in a different way. It's going to be fairly accurate and a proven technique today. And that's one of the common technique applied in evaluation, creating evaluation data set. Third point is like evaluation is never done. Like I said, like your evaluation data set should continuously grow. Your fine tuning should continuously grow. So how do we engineer when you go to production to capture this so that your evaluation data in ideal world is like infinite? It should be always on.
I think just to add to that, right? I think tactically, when you start to get production data in, can you build eval data sets from a subset of the production data is actually way more useful than just your tests. So test evals, you can pick a data set that's available, build synthetic test data sets, but that's more for, think of it as the CI/CD process. Yeah, you're testing it, you're seeing, okay, it works generally. Across our customers, we've seen that production use cases are very, very different from your test cases because you've built it in a very, you built it with that. Have you seen that meme where the product managers have built like 3 different shapes and people are just putting everything through one shape? That just happens so often in production. So creating a way that you can actually track what's happening in production and add it to your data set so that this doesn't break later on. It's the same strategy, right? How do you build unit tests? You get a bug, you add it to a unit test so that it doesn't happen the next time. The same strategy works really well. And we've seen it play out with customers in production today.
And I'm just going to add one thing. You have the good fortune of sitting right behind one of our foremost experts in LLM evaluation, Jiten. He's worked on this project called Ragus, which is an open source evaluation tool. I think it's definitely going to be something that's become more and more prevalent. And to add just one small thing there, I think we see a lot of like sort of like pure LLM driven evaluation. One area I feel that's underexplored is using LLMs to augment your eval data set. So basically you can take an eval data set of 1,000 and use the LLM to basically generate variants of that.
Great. Other questions? Maybe from this side, yeah.
We can take one more question.
Okay. And then afterwards, folks will be around, so
Yeah.
you can of course. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Pradeep. I'm a founder of a startup AI for a bit. You folks kind of touched on this piece earlier about kind of the quality of the output. And I'm kind of curious, what are some of the best practices in having keep track of quality over time, not just from an application outcomes perspective, the subtle bits, but also from a systems perspective. What are the best practices there? I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts.
Maybe I'll take a first stab. I think continuous evaluation, so picking the right evaluation metrics, and then continuous evaluation over a sample of production data is what seems to work really well. So you have like you're constantly plotting improvements or regressions across the various evaluations you set up. Now, how do you pick an evaluation depends on the task that you have. So is it a summarization task? Is it so basically a compression task, a generative task, or a answering task? But then all of these, I think there's enough information on what metrics you can pick for some of these tasks. But then monitoring these tasks on a sample set in production, like almost like you're sampling the fire hose, evaluating it, figuring out what's happening. That's, I think, the simplest way to chart if something's going down or something's going up.
And I would add to that, but there's no silver bullet, right? So the key is that you keep on working on it and you have the right tools to make sure that you know when something's going wrong.
So that's a very good point. Actually, it's a very hard problem because every LLM provider promises and follows that we do not use customer data. And then LLM by design is very customer specific. It's not like a deterministic software. And so far the industry where it has been is like, there is something called as Gauntlet. There are many open source evaluation, MTEP for embeddings and all of it, but there are also additional things, these research labs like Mosaic has one and Mixtel has their own data set. Everyone talks about that in paper, but so far it's like CI/CD. We have this basic set of tasks and we are committed to keep adding and improving the task, but say you are releasing a quantized or non-quantized version, the test metrics is going to be like before and after change. However, I want to admit basically what you're saying is it's very customer specific. And the only way we are trying to solve that is like enable customers to build their own evaluation data set. And then one thing we made sure to get right was developer experience. Like everything is version, everything is going to have an experience. Like you can build for a specific version of a model, specific version of embedding, specific version of like the RAG end-to-end workflow that you have built up. So you can always roll back, roll front, and then adapt appropriately. So we are trying to build a developer experience to overcome that shortcoming of not able to evaluate for the customer.
All right. Thank you so much. This session is at an end, so thank you to the panelists. I think next we have a couple of demos from folks. I'll hand it back to Ayush to take it from here. Thank you.
I think next demo is Yi.
Okay. No, actually, let's just do this. Oh, no, not presenting again? Present. Share screen. This one, okay. Okay. All right, thanks for coming. Originally it was gonna be Lori here today, so sorry, I guess. Okay, what is Llamaindex? So Llamaindex is an open source framework to help you build LLM applications with data. We connect with practically every LLM and vector database. And we have a toolkit for using production RAG and agent strategies. So you might think, well, you know, I already know how to do that, so why do I need to use you guys? So this is kind of like two parts. One is I'm going to talk about like why you might want to use us to connect to LLMs. And the second part is, you know, talk about a little bit more about like production level strategies. Okay, so the first thing is what I call quirks mode. So this is from back in the web days. Has anybody not used Netscape Navigator? Okay, so to give you an idea of what Netscape Navigator is, and this is why you should always be a little bit careful when, you know, hearing VCs and they say, well, you know, hey, your business idea is bad. Netscape was this idea that you could build a web browser and charge people $100 a year to use it, right? You know, and I know this very well because I grew up in Champaign, Illinois, and there was a graduate student from the University of Illinois who did this. And he's like, yeah, you know, like we're just going to charge people to use this web browser, and then we're going to release a new version and people will pay again. And what features will be in this new version? Oh, I'll tell you, there's the blink tag. You think I'm making this up, but I'm not. Literally, one of the main features of like Netscape 3 was that there was a tag that lets you make the text on the website blink. And he wanted to charge $100 for this. Unfortunately, there's another company called Microsoft who was like, hey, you know what? We should just give away the browser for free. And so his company ran out of money, and I don't know what happened to him. But the point is that back in the day, people were building these things and they were very quirky, right? And so in the web, at some point we said, look, these are bad ideas. Let's have quirks mode. So in the same way, I think LLMs today are also in quirks mode. So how do we know we're still in quirks mode? So this is part of the interactive part. I know a lot of you build LLM applications, so you should ace this. So what does decreasing temperature do in an LLM? Somebody raise their hand, come on. Makes it more serious, go ahead. It makes it more, well, actually decreasing makes it more predictable, right? More predictable. Okay, next question. What does decreasing top P do in an LM? Is it? Yes, more probabilistic results to make it more predictable, right? When you decrease it, it makes it more predictable. Actually, there's another variable. It's called top K in Anthropic. Do you know what decreasing top K does in an LM? It makes it more predictable, right? So we have three knobs here that do, to a software developer, basically the same thing. To a statistician, they do very different things. But why? So here's a quirk. What do you think Anthropic's default top P is? Is it 1? No, it's 0.999. And you would only find this if you went to the Anthropic Hackathon Slack, and then man who is at Anthropic said it's 0.999. Okay, so what if I just want deterministic output? You guys build with LMs. You probably want deterministic output from time to time. Any ideas? What 0? Temperature 0? Oh, temperature 0. Actually, it doesn't work. So here's Amjad saying, hey, you know, it's actually not deterministic even at temperature 0. And that's actually true. And actually, it gets even better. But wait, there's more. See, temperature 0 also makes the model dumber. Did you guys know this? Yeah, so not only do you not get deterministic output, but now you have a dumb model to include. So there's a paper you can read from Hugging Face about this. Okay, so who here likes Llama 2? Who here uses Llama 2? Come on, I know some of you use Llama 2. I see one hand. Okay. Oh, Llama 2 is no longer popular anymore. I guess I got to change the slide. Okay, so most people use the chat version of Llama 2, right? So you know how to chat with Llama 2? So here's the sample prompt for how to do the chat model, the tokenization, the separation for Llama 2. Here's another one. As you can see, they're different, right? Now, here's the fun part about this. These two are both from the same library. Here's the other fun part. They're both wrong. So, in fact, if you go to the Facebook GitHub, you'll see how to chat with Llama 2, and they write some Python. So there it is. I'm sure you're all pretty proficient at Python. So you can now tell me what's wrong with this. This is something that somebody sent me on Slack. Come on, somebody. Wait, I thought you guys were good at Python. Okay. Anyways, I'll tell you what's wrong with this. There's actually several places where it's wrong. The main thing is that the system message and the first message should be combined. And it should be like that. Okay, well, it doesn't really matter. You can't really see from the slide, but basically what happens is that after a while, it actually starts hallucinating the separation between messages if you do it wrong. And fun fact, actually, even if you do it correct on replicate. So embeddings should be quirk-free, right? Embeddings, they're just transformations from text to vectors. Can't really screw that up. Or can you? So this is from the official OpenAI AP library here. You know, this is how you do it. OpenAI.embedding.create. And this is from also the official OpenAI cookbook. And it says, hey, you know, we're going to do this thing very similar, but we're going to call this thing called get embedding. And if you look at get embedding, it replaces the new lines with spaces, which doesn't happen in the other one. So which one is correct? Well, if you go through GitHub, you'll see, hey, Boris Power, he works at OpenAI. And he said, look, you know, it used to be a thing, but it's no longer a thing. So you don't have to replace the new lines with spaces. So I'm like, great. Now I can change this in Llamaindex. And that's what I did. And it broke our most simple demo. So thank you, Boris. So bonus quirk, Mistral. We hear a lot about Mistral today. To talk to Mistral with the Instruct, which is also the model that most people use, it tells you that you should use the /s, but not the starter, the s, you know, the XML to do the beginning of statement, which is a little weird. So I like to think of Mistral as the most sarcastic model because it's always doing /s. And today, you know, there was this thing about, oh, Mistral leaked, right? This new Mistral model leaked. And, you know, it's got great performance. I think you all will be very happy to hear that it continues to be sarcastic. So, yeah, so LLMs are very, very much in very, very early stages. You are all here very, very, very early. There are lots of quirks. And we spend a lot of time working on those. Okay, so the next thing, what are we here for? Production RAG. So first question is, what is RAG? So can somebody define to me, well, first off, who doesn't know what RAG is? Come on, raise your hands, come on. Okay, so we have one person is brave enough to say that they don't know RAG. So the rest of you all know RAG very well, I guess. So I'm gonna, Rajesh, what is RAG? Oh, a piece of cloth. Okay, come on.
To make the LLM take something that doesn't fit in the context.
It's a hack to make the LLM take something that doesn't fit in the context. Anything else? Go ahead. Okay, that's the best answer so far. Retrieval augmented generation, it does a semantic search and puts that in your context. So you now are a RAG expert, right? You understand? Actually, I didn't understand when I joined Llamaindex what RAG is. But it's actually a very simple concept. As you say, it's really about searching, giving, and getting, or searching for the most relevant information, giving the data to the LLM, and getting the best result from the LLM, right? In fact, I think we should retire the acronym RAG, and we should call it BOWS. Better output with search, okay? Same idea, much smaller words. Okay, so basic RAG. So I'm going to show you a demo. This was made by a couple of friends of mine who are master's students at the University of Oregon State. So this is just a little chat bot that lets you talk with the resumes. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, and it responds, right? So this is basic RAG. And it's open source, so you can check it out. It's built with Llamaindex. Okay, search engine RAG. Search engine RAG is, I'm sure you've all seen it, Google Bard, Bing, which is now rebranded as Copilot to make everybody's life more interesting, ChatGPT with browsing. So I tried that out also. So, can't really read it from there, but I'll read it for you. So I asked ChatGPT with browsing, ChatGPT, I said, what 2022 movie won the Oscars? And it said the movie Coda won the Best Picture award of the Oscars in 2022 because Coda won the 2022 Oscars. But then I said, what year did Coda come out? And it said Coda was released in 2021. So I said, well, so is it a 2022 movie? And it said, no, Coda is not a 2022 movie because it came out in 2021. And so I said, so which 2022 movie won the Oscars? And ChatGPT, in all its wisdom, said, no 2022 released movie won the Best Picture award at the 2022 Oscars. The award went to Coda, a film released in 2021. So this illustrates a very, very important principle when it comes to RAG. Garbage in, garbage out. So my point to you is that basic RAG is not enough, right? If a college student can do it, and Google's already doing it, then you're not going to get paid doing it, right? So how can we make this better in production? So there's a couple of things that we have in Llamaindex. We have a whole toolkit of tools to do more advanced RAG techniques. A couple ones just today because we don't have limited time. One is called a sub-question query engine. This is also open source, by the way. So here, basically what it does is it takes one question and it decomposes it into multiple questions and then talks about it, searches over multiple documents. So let's see what happens. And this is open source. You can take a look at it. It's called SEC Insights. It's also live. You can try it out for yourself. And basically, it's taking this one question of highest revenue and then saying, okay, what are the revenues of the three companies here, right? So this is a very, very powerful technique that we see being used in production. Another set of strategies that we see used a lot in production is what I call small to big. So you can also think of it as called embed small, retrieve big. So like ESRB, if any of you play video games, right? The basic idea, like why you would want to do small to big is what do embeddings actually do? So can somebody explain to me what embeddings actually do? Like we talk a lot about semantic search, we talk about embeddings. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep going because I'm running out of time. Embeddings, what they do is they transform some text into some thought of the meaning of the text, right? but we actually don't know what they do, to be honest, right? Because like the model is too complex. We actually don't know what the model does. But if you embed smaller, you can think that the meaning is more concentrated. So what's the smallest thing to embed that has, still some kind of semantic meaning? Sentences. So here's an example of small to big. Here we have this thing. It says Rohit Agarwal is a product manager. He's founder of Portkey AI. They help companies use observability to productionize LLM applications. Previously, Mr. Agarwal worked at Pepper. He graduated from the Berlin Institute of Technology and Science with honors. And then the question comes in and says, where does Mr. Agarwal work? So does anybody have an idea of what the sentences would be that would be closest? What would have the most semantic similarity of these 5 sentences? Yes, the co-founder of Portkey AI. That is what we wanted to say, but it's actually wrong. And actually, it's because, if you think about it, Agarwal is actually not a very common word in the corpus. So the ones that are going to actually have the most semantic similarity are actually the ones that don't have Agarwal, that have Agarwal in them. And that's where retrieving a larger context than just what you embed becomes really important. So we're going to skip over this. There's some other small to big strategies we have in Llamaindex. I'm just going to leave you with a final thought. OpenAI Dev Day, they basically showed that you can go here from the naive RAG to more than double the performance by applying these techniques. But not all the techniques work for every single application. So some of the techniques they try don't actually work. And we have most of these, or basically all of these techniques in Llamaindex. So that's really my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, E. That was super interesting. Our next presentation is by Rajaswa. He'll be joining us remotely. Rajaswa is senior lead engineer, AI engineer at Postman, and he would be focusing on the challenges Postman faced while building and rolling out Postbot in production, and like what are the challenges, how did they solve them, right? I'll just quickly invite and first help him set up his system, share screen, and then you can start. Yeah, I think it's fine. We can hear you well, Rajaswa.
Okay, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Rajaswa. I'm an AI researcher / engineer at Postman, and today I'll be talking about LLMs in production with Postbot. So Postbot is your AI assistant for API workflows in Postman, and the general goal is to make the user more productive within the Postman application. And that can be done in a couple of ways. So one way is obviously task automation. So you can, for example, use Postbot to do easier scripting for testing your API requests or visualizing your responses and so on. Or you can also use it to generate API documentation, which is usually a very tedious task. You can also use Postbot as an AI assistant, which acts like a support bot and helps the user discover new features and makes them more productive in the process. So with that in mind, let me quickly talk about how we saw Postbot evolving over time and how we kept up with the generative AI ecosystem while still ignoring the hype. So here is a short timeline of how Postbot evolved. So we launched, there was no natural language interface. Then we enabled the natural language interface. We added a couple of features. Then we made Postbot universally available across the Postman application, so you could access it anywhere from the app, and a couple more features. Then we added inline autocomplete features, so you get code suggestions inline as you are manually editing your scripts. And then we added AI-generated API documentation. And as of today, we are experimenting with major architectural upgrades where Postbot will become a slightly autonomous agent within your Postman application. Now I want to index this against the developing LLM ecosystem and try to explain how we approach this. So obviously this is the public rollout timeline, and there is a lag of 1 or 2 months in terms of experimentations and internal testing and so on, right? So we have been mostly very forward-looking, using the most latest LLM features available out there, but we have also waited for the ecosystem to mature and then go out and roll it out in production, right? For example, if you see here, you have this period where you had multiple models coming out, so lots of options available, cheaper models, longer context lengths, and so on, right? So once that was out, we could start our experimentations. We were comfortable enough with rolling out features, and then we had features like generate tests for your entire API collections or start visualizing your API responses, which usually require longer prompts. Same thing over here as well, right? So we had Code Llama come out, we had the Mistral model come out, and then a better completion model from OpenAI. And then this shows some maturity in the code completion kind of ecosystem in the LLM world. And then that pushed us to roll out the inline autocomplete feature. And then somewhere around November, you had this move towards chat models with function callings and tool usage and retrieval coming natively with the LLM APIs. And you had multiple options again, Assistants API, Claude, Gemini, all these things, right? And then OpenAI deprecated most of their completion models. So that was a move towards building more of agentic interfaces for the entire community. And again, we saw that level of maturity coming up in the LLM ecosystem. And as soon as we saw that, we went ahead and started upgrading the architecture of Postbot to make it a slightly autonomous agent, which will have in-app context, can execute actions for the user, and also perform multi-step workflows in the application for the user. So this kind of, I think, was a very balanced approach, which has turned out fairly well for us as of today. And I think this is in general quite insightful for many people out there. So I do not have a lot of time, but I want to quickly discuss a couple of challenges that we faced and also share a couple of insights that we found during the 9 months of production that Postbot has seen until now. So first thing is domain familiarity. So what you see on the left is Postman Flows. So Postman Flows is a low-code, no-code kind of a product which helps you build API workflows. And it's a fairly new product, and it's not out there in the open domain. Now, if you compare this to something like Postman Collections or the Postman Testing Reference, it is out there in the open domain for a while now. It's widely adopted, and most of the LLMs have already been exposed to it. But Postman Flows, on the other side, is mostly closed domain as of today. So what we immediately saw as a use case for Postman Flows was that can we generate end-to-end working flows with AI? And we tried it, and it didn't work. And the immediate cause was lack of domain familiarity. The syntax and the semantics of the flow structure was simply not familiar to most LLMs. And you compare it to something like Postman Collections and Postman Testing, we could build features fairly quickly for that because most of the LLMs were familiar with those particular things. So domain familiarity might be a huge challenge for you, but at the same time, if you have features with which most LLMs are already familiar with, then you should try to squeeze as much alpha as possible from it, as we did for collections and test script generations with Postbot. Then another important challenge is prompt and workflow management. So in Postman, what we have done is we have expanded Postbot rapidly across the product. And you see that there's a chat UI, and Postbot is available in the documentation editor. It's available in the output visualization renderer and in the script editor and so on, right? So they're expanding across different products, different UI real estates, and more teams start get involved. And you have more integrations coming in your backend services. And at the same time, since you're exploring more use cases, you need rapid iterations of your prompts. So your backend services can get fairly complex fairly quickly. So one important thing that you need to do from the very beginning is decouple your prompt management from your backend services. So you should have a separate version control for your backend services and a separate version control for your prompts and workflows. And that really helps a lot in terms of reducing the complexity of your backend, as well as boosting collaboration and flexibility in your development. And a related thing again is prompt observability. So you can't really do any iteration or experimentation or exploration without real-time observability. So you would be wise to put that in place as early as possible. How trivial, no matter how trivial it is, right? Just a basic observability thing running out there. Now, obviously, in challenges like this, something like Portkey or even something as simple as a Postman workspace really comes in handy. Another thing is tackling non-determinism. So if you have a natural language interface, then it is very much prone to intent misidentification. And ideally, what you want is that at the top of your system, you want to reduce non-determinism as much as possible, because if you have a lot of non-determinism at the top, then your errors propagate down your system and the whole assistant becomes quite error prone, right? So there's an example, right? If you have a natural language interface, then if the intent identification is not robust enough, then it will be very much error prone. So there's a trade-off between determinism and customization. Natural language lets you customize your intents, but then again, it's not very deterministic in nature. So how do you solve that? So you have fixed UI CTS. So for example, buttons. So you have a button here to generate documentation in Postbot, or you have a button here to add tests with Postbot, or visualize a response with Postbot. And these UI CTS are already mapped to an AI workflow or a prompt in the backend, right? So you're bypassing the entire intent identification pipeline, and that is giving you certain determinism. But then again, you're losing out on the customization. So how do you solve that? So you can go somewhere in the middle with some flexible CTS like suggestion trees. For example, I have clicked the suggestion here, which is test for response. And then I can roll out a finite set of sub-suggestions, which is test for data length or test for content type or test for schema and so on, right? So you are providing some level of customization and still getting deterministic intent identification systems at the top of your system. Same thing with chat redirects. I can say visualize a response, set up with a prompt. It will take me to the Postbot UI. I can customize my visualization with a prompt. But since I have the visualization CTA as the entry point, it's already mapped to the visualization AI workflow. So now that's deterministic output that you can process. Now, there are some insights as well from a product and implementation perspective. There are a lot of them, but I'll only share a few today. So one is obviously, as an AI researcher, you need to answer where to use LLMs and where not to use LLMs, right? So to give you an example about where to use LLMs is this API response visualization feature. So this feature was brought out to avoid parsing long and complex response body, right? You can represent a response body as a line chart or a table, and it's much more easier to read than raw response data. But again, to get that visualization, you have to write a long and complex visualization script, which again is a huge task. So this is somewhere where AI perfectly fits in. We enabled AI generated visualization scripts. And as soon as we did that, we saw a 200% increase in the API response visualization feature usage, which is like 3 times the previous usage within a month of releasing the AI-based visualization. And this is also evident from the organic feedback that we got from our users that it was tricky earlier, but with Postbot now it's working just fine. So we could triple the usage just by adding a simple prompt. And the insight over here is that there will exist low-hanging fruits that need not necessarily feel like magic or an AI first thing, but that can really boost the existing underlying feature that your product has, right? This is really, really powerful. Then about entry points, right? You have fixed UI CTS and you also have a natural language interface through the global chat UI. So what does the traffic distribution look like? So as of today, from the 9 months of data that we have, if you look at the user count, 20% of the users prefer using natural language interface through the chat window, and 80% of them, which is a huge majority, still use the fixed UI CTS. And in terms of absolute usage, if we track the events, then 28% of the usage is coming from natural language. And again, the rest of the 72% is coming from fixed UI CTS. So this is a very high level statistics, and we cannot really come out with very robust insights from this, but there are certain things that you can deduce in terms of who are your advanced users. Maybe natural language ones are your advanced users, and they are able to customize their intents better in natural language. On the other hand, the ones who are using fixed UI CTS, they are mostly trying to bootstrap their tests and documentations. And for further fine-tuning, they can use natural language to guide Postbot appropriately. And if you see, 20% of the users are accounting for 28% of usage. So on an average, they're using more Postbot than the ones who are using fixed UI CTS. So you can kind of figure out these things from a very high-level statistics as well. And then the insight is that you need a balance of both fixed UI CTS as well as natural language interface to target a wider demographic of users as well as a varying level of use cases. And then if majority of your traffic is coming from fixed UI CTS, then what is the even point of having a global chat UI? So obviously, the most important thing is it gives you finer granularity of control in expressing your intent. You can customize your intents and so on, or instructions to the AI assistant. But apart from that, you can start mining user expectations. For example, we see a lot of requests coming from GraphQL tab or the environment tab, And now that is a signal for us that our users want us to build AI features in this particular tabs, right? Then you can start observing conversational user patterns. So we see users attempting to modify the generated content, undo certain actions, provide feedback. Now we know these are the type of workflows or usage habits that people are trying to develop with Postbot, and we can do something about it because we're able to capture it through conversational data. And then even more importantly, you can enable a product-wide support and fallback. So for example, if a user says, can you set up monitoring for this collection? And Postbot cannot do that as of today. But Postbot can say that I haven't got the superpowers to do that yet, but here's how you can set up a monitor. And it can just deploy a simple retrieval augmented generation pipeline on the Postman documentation and guide the user like a kind of a hand-holding, a step-by-step guide to make them use the monitoring feature. So you are not exactly automating that task with AI, but still the user is able to use it much more efficiently because it has an expert sitting beside it across the entire app. Again, then we have this philosophy of being AI native versus AI first. What this means is that we do want to model AI features for our users, but we don't want to use LLMs or AI for everything, right? That can't be our first solution. So to give you an example, we have intent identification. So as soon as we enabled natural language interface early on, you have to deploy an intent identification layer to map it to the right AI workflow in the backend. So we started with a zero-shot prompting, and the accuracy was quite bad, 28%. There was huge latency, being a LLM call, and then cost, rate limits, all those things, right? And then it was non-deterministic. There was no guarantee that if the user inputs the same thing twice, they'll get the same intent identified, right? So what we did was we quickly migrated to a trained non-LLM static classifier. So we annotated a data set, we curated it, maintained its quality, trained the classifier, and the accuracy bumped to 85%. The latency went down to 0.3 seconds, and it was deterministic. Since it's not a generation model anymore, it's completely deterministic. And then now you have a cheap, fast, deterministic intent identification layer at the top, and that drastically reduces the errors across your entire assistant workflow, right? But this has a huge problem. What if I add a new feature? How do I expand my intent classifier to that? For example, if I introduce a new feature of AI-generated documentation somewhere in November, and my classifier has never seen real-world user data for that, then what do I do? Now, this is where you can use LLM. So you model the LLM to simulate a user who's trying to query Postbot or instruct Postbot to generate documentation. So you are trying to generate synthetic data with LLMs. And you can use these new data points, add them to your classification dataset, retrain your classifier, and you can keep on updating your static classifier. So the insight is this, right? Don't throw LLM at all your problems. Use AI as a fallback and use LLM as a tool. So in this case, the LLM was used as a tool to keep on developing your intent identification pipeline over time. And it's an auxiliary tool that you only have to use one time and not have to use real time in production every time. Another example is the fixed request workflow. So this is something that we're experimenting with today. And the goal over here is that how can we use Postbot to get the user to a 200 OK response status as quickly as possible, right? They have located the API request they want to use, but they're not able to get a proper response with it. What can we do? And it's a difficult problem, right? Because your authentication might be off, your path parameters might be off. There might be 100 things that are wrong with the request, and you have to fix them all before you get a proper response. Again, Postman will obviously show you the error, but do you throw this error as it is to a LLM? Maybe not, right? You can spot a lot of these issues natively. For example, are there typos in my URL? Am I in the wrong environment? These are kind of issues that you can spot without necessarily using an LLM. So for example, here I haven't selected the right environment. My URL variable is unresolved. I'm getting an error. Immediately you see the CTL for Postbot saying what's wrong. As soon as I click on that, it will say that you have an unresolved variable, maybe you're in the wrong environment, try to switch the environment, and it will start working. Now, this can be achieved with a basic semantic search or even a basic fuzzy string match, right? And this can all happen locally in the user's application. There's no LLM involved at all. But then you can use LLM as a fallback. If nothing else works, all your heuristics all your heuristics don't work, then you can use LLM as a fallback. So in this case, maybe you point them to the relevant documentation based on the error code they are seeing, or you search the web for a solution or the documentation of the API and so on, right? So LLM is treated as a fallback. So the insight over here is that there are certain high impact AI assistant workflows that you can emulate without necessarily using LLMs at all. And this can be really, really impactful in your product. For example, time to a 200 OK response status is a huge North Star metric that we track internally at Postman. And turns out you can solve most of the parts of that workflow without using any LLM at all. So that's one of the important insights that we have recently learned. I think I'll stop here for now. If you have any questions, I'll take them, or we can continue. Yeah.
No, awesome. Thanks so much, Rajaswa, for that. I think that was just a lot of insights condensed into a 15-minute talk, right? I think this can easily be a 16-minute talk, and we're all learning insights from how is Postman getting it right for millions of users. So thanks so much for that, Rajaswa. Maybe if there are questions, I'll write them down and we'll do something about it. Are we folks up for?
Yeah.
Thank you. Are we folks up for another demo? This is 10 minutes. Yes? Okay. I'm just sensing the energy in the room. Yes. Okay. Perfect. So we're going to be talking about LLMs, LLM ops, and how does that help you get to production faster. I think we've discussed a lot of challenges, a lot of solutions as well. I'm just going to do like a real-time demo of how can you really implement a bunch of these things in production. Also, a bunch of stuff that Postman does. We will cover that as well. And I'm going to be fairly fast with this now. Great. So I have like 5 slides and then we'll just get to the demo. Right. So LLM ops for production success. So you built an awesome Gen AI app, right? And now we're going to production. So we're at that stage where we have a POC, we're going to production. But then I just got rate limited. Anybody got rate limited? Their application rate limited? Yeah, it's annoying, right? Your users like your application and you're getting rate limited for you. Not cool. Another model just dropped and you're tempted to try it out, but do you go back and rewrite all of your prompts? Anybody face that? Trying a new model, production? We suddenly saw a spike on our costs because a lot of users came in. How are we managing user credits for LLMs? Who's editing my prompt? So if prompt is code, how are you collaboratively managing, editing, deploying prompts? How are you doing that? Do our users really like our responses? I mean, we talked about hallucinations quite a bit, but how are users really enjoying our responses? Good, bad? How do we even get visibility about it? And I think the most important question almost everybody asks is, how do we keep getting better? What's the next iteration? What's the differentiation? How do we serve better, more accurate responses? But if you think about it, like if you take a step back, just meta thinking, these are essentially all product engineering questions of just working with LLMs. They're not really your app's responsibility in a way. You're building, say, the next wealth management app that is going to provide salespeople with the best experience, but that's nothing to do with tracking, hallucinations, rate limits, and all of these problems. So these are all product and engineering challenges in my mind. And that's also sort of where we came from and said, can we really build Portkey, which is a 2-line code upgrade that fixes this for you? And when I say fixes, it really fixes it for you. How it does this is, this is I think the client most of us would have seen. You change the base URL to Portkey, and we essentially launch a gateway in the middle that does almost all of this in a very beautiful separation of concerns out of it. So what you'll end up doing is, instead of you building all of this on your application, you switch the base URL, Portkey will do observability, model management, prompt versioning, all of the good stuff, and you get it for free just with 2 lines of code. We can then connect to all of these models, etc. And I'm going to show you how this works. Internally, it's super complex. So, I mean, we can definitely talk about how these LLM ops systems get built. But you have the gateway, observability, inference, training, a bunch of these pieces, which then will come together to give you the perfect LLM ops product. And we've actually, you don't have to take our word for it, we've actually done this over 157 billion tokens that we've processed over the last 3 odd months. We have over 200 models that people are using on Portkey with a 99.99% uptime across thousands of prompts. So we've seen a lot of production data, and that's where we sort of built out the product and kept improving it, iterating over it as well. We've got obviously customers like Postman, Quizzes, Haptic, which are extremely large volume, diverse use case users, and they're all using Portkey to just stay ahead of the game and just keep getting better with just inserting LLM ops into their workflows. Cool. So that's it. I will jump to a quick demo on how this works. Can we do code a little bit? Like, yeah, I won't do a lot of code, but a little bit's fine. Great. So this is your typical code block where you have your OpenAI code written. What I've done is I've just added where is it proxying to, and I've put in my API key, right? So this is it. The rest of the code does not need to change. So I've edited my client a little bit, and I'm going to run this. So it's basically saying write a 5-sentence plot for a horror TV show in San Francisco. We can do a lot of horror TV shows here, but so it's giving me an answer, right? So it's streamed the answer out, and this is what I expect. So there's no magic over here. The magic that's happened is all of this actually got logged onto your Portkey instance that was connected to it. So if you see, this is the request that we just made. And in real time, you actually see what was the request the user made, what was the response. And if this is good, I can just rate it right here and say, okay, this is some bit of human feedback coming in. We actually have, a lot of these calls happening. So embeddings, completions, vector database, all of these calls, you can actually monitor each and every one of these calls. What a lot of our users tend to just do is use the arrow keys to just walk through the different request response pairs, especially the ones that gave you an error. So I can just say, only show me the ones that have given me a 400 error. And I want to see what are the reasons this is happening. So now very quickly iterating over what's going wrong and improving our prompts, improving our workflows. So the first step is just visibility over logs, right? On top of this, we've built a very solid monitoring system or analytics system, which is you can actually see and track all of the costs, all of the latency, and the errors across your requests. So you can see that our mean latency over time has been this much. I can really only see Llama 2's latency or Mistral's latency and compare sort of how these are doing with each other. This is where a lot of our users spend a lot of their time, which is tell me what are the errors that are coming up. These are API errors, and these are accuracy errors. Accuracy errors are obviously more interesting to look at. So you will actually point out those accuracy errors, go to those logs, and just debug what's really happening. But yeah. Portkey also gets cache built in. So if you have a simple query, similar query coming in, just serve it from cache. Especially helpful in development. You can keep hitting the same code again and again. You're not incurring any LLM costs, and you're always getting the same output out. You can also channel your feedback back into Portkey. So you have like one single pane of glass where you're seeing all of your requests, the responses, and the feedback on top of it. So like this can be your data, this can be your dashboard that tells you the health of your LLM app in some sense. Great. The starting point of all of this can either be directly the SDK, but I think more advanced users tend to also have a problem with where do I manage my prompts? It's either all in my code or I've stuffed them in a database and then trying to figure out how I work with them. Portkey has this beautiful prompt library where I can actually create the same prompt across any of the 20+ providers we support across any of the models. So I can literally do the same prompt. Let's pick together as an example. I'm going to pick, see if there's a Mixtral model here. Just having a hard time finding it. Switch back. Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's pick any scale. And we're going to use the Mixtral model of any scale that's actually extremely performant in our tests. And I'm going to say the same thing. 5-sentence horror story set in. And then I get a variable. And these variables can then just get used in prompt management again. So you put in San Francisco here, and I can just generate this. So it's like this universal prompt playground, but instead of doing it on OpenAI, you do it across every provider, every model that exists. So you have now a completion. You can just quickly change the model saying, okay, this is what Mixtool said. Let me see what the Llama 270B model says. Oh, it's still going on. Oh, it's detailed, right? Great. But I can also just keep it at Llama 70B and then see what the model is saying. So quickly evaluating what's working, what's not working. When you're ready, you can actually just save this prompt. And what this gives you is an API to now call this prompt. So you're not managing this prompt in your code anymore. This is cached within the gateway that we just saw. And in that gateway, you can actually just hit this exact endpoint, which is private to you, with the variables. And you can always come back here and mess with the prompt. So you can always update the prompt, deploy that specific version to production, making it super easy for you to just make that little tweak in the prompt without having to break production completely or go through the entire SDLC lifecycle. We also give you a nice little evals view. So as the prompt versions improve, you can see how your app is actually moving better over time. So this is something obviously Postman uses quite a bit. How do you iteratively get better and know that you're getting better? This is a great way to just do that. The last bit is just configurations, the router. So Portkey actually sits on top of a very fast router. We're actually the fastest. It's a 48 KB router that we've written. It's actually open source. So you can go to Portkey AI Gateway, check it out. But this gateway is actually smart enough to route to any of the 150 plus models that we support. But more than that, you can write your own custom configurations, which is when OpenAI goes down, just switch to any scale automatically. Distribute my load between 2 Azure regions automatically. So those are sort of rules you can write. So for example, here's a simple fallback to Azure route. Now imagine how much code would this be for you to write? And this is not your application's responsibility, but you can just say retry 5 times, fall back from OpenAI to Azure OpenAI, and you're done. You use this config in your headers, and that's it. Similarly, I think another one that's very popular is, let me try to test a new model in production. So you will just say, run it in load balance mode, and let the 95% of the traffic go to OpenAI, but I'm going to try the Llama 70B in production. 5% here, 95% here. So these are good old blue-green deployments of the traditional engineering world applied to LLMs and made extremely easy. Once you have enough of this data that's coming in, you can actually just fine-tune your own models on a continuous basis in 3 clicks. So essentially, you've gone from observing your entire system, managing and collaboratively deploying prompts to production, and also then managing the entire routing. So the actual production use cases of how you're going to serve your users, that goes through the gateway, and you have this beautiful data set that you can use to fine-tune. So that's overall the entire journey with Portkey. I'm happy to obviously take questions after this, or if...
One quick question.
Sure.
I'm assuming that this works across cloud.
Yes, yes.
We can manage it.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do is the gateway can be deployed on any cloud. And then we have the control plane that sits in the cloud. So basically, you have the gateway in your VPC and the control plane in the cloud.
One more question. On the prompts, which you save the prompts, right?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure we can create a reusable library of these prompts, which
Yeah.
my other teams and teams can use, right?
Yes.
What's the governance you have built yet, or is it still in progress?
Yeah, so we have something called collections in this prompt library, and you can give specific RBAC rules on every collection. So you can say, this is a shared collection with my entire team. You can build multiple teams, etc. Yeah. So I think we've actually focused a lot more on enterprise usage. So we have a lot of early stage companies as well using, but it's more built for the enterprise who's really going to production and is like having enough of a scale to have this work for them. Awesome. Any questions? Otherwise, you can also scan that QR code and I'm available there. But yes, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you. I hope the session's been useful, and I hope we have some great conversations with pizza and some drinks over. Thanks so much. I'll see you around.